This is Doug, and welcome to another episode of the Practicing Accountant Podcast. Today, we are going to go through a survey that was done, and a survey was polling various accounting firms about what they expect in the year ahead. And there's a few surprises I felt, and also some things that are kind of annoying as we continue to look ahead into the future of accounting in this industry that continues to change and all the opportunity that exists. We hope you enjoy some of this conversation today on the Practicing Accountant Podcast.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. 2 days in
That's right.
already.
It is now the season of darkness and despair.
I think it's a little extreme, and the good news is every day from here on out it's going to get lighter, longer.
Thank God. Yeah.
Right. And right now is this was the time of year where I would hide. So I would hide until about like next week, and I wouldn't talk to anyone. I wouldn't do anything that wasn't family or selfish related. And I would like do the dry cleaning, change the oil in the car, try to do anything I possibly could that I wasn't going to be able to do over the next few months. So yeah, I hear you a little bit on the despair part, but hopefully people have been listening to some of the stuff we've been throwing out there and making some changes so that they can go through this season with better pricing, fewer clients, that kind of stuff, right?
Little optimism. Yeah.
Maybe we need to do a workshop or something. Maybe we should offer a 2-day workshop on how to get some of this stuff tightened up.
That would be a good idea.
It's not a bad idea, right?
Yeah.
Well, speaking of a new year, it's that time of year where everyone puts out their best of lists, the best of 2024, and best movies, best songs, best TV shows, best whatever plays. And then there's that tide that turns and people start to look forward to 2025 and talk about the year ahead. And I have here the accounting today, the year ahead, balancing act between confidence and resistance. It's titled. And it says accountants are going into 2025 with positive expectations, but there are signs of friction in their forward progress. And I'll get to that in a minute here.
Interesting.
So anyway, accounting today, as good as they are, they always go out and do these surveys and they surveyed a bunch of firms and ask them a bunch of questions. And so let's start with revenue growth projections. So the majority of respondents are expecting 10% or more growth this year, 22% somewhere between 6 and 9, and then half are expecting anywhere between 0 and 5%.
What was the percentage of the 10% growth?
24% of respondents said that they are expecting double-digit growth in this coming year.
80. What did you say? 50% said 0 to 5% growth.
So here's the crazy thing about this for me. Like, I know there's a lot of transaction-related revenue that comes into these firms, but for the most part, you should be able to project your growth pretty well at this point. Like, you've already brought on whatever you're likely going to have client-wise in this coming year. Now, once you get out of the busy season, there'll be, projects and maybe some, other services that a transaction pops up, a client does a deal, whatever, that adds additional revenue. But you should have a pretty good idea of what your growth in this coming year is going to be today. And it always shocks me that it's and I hope maybe these folks that are responding actually know what their growth already is for this year, or at least anticipate it to be. But
and
I thought
they didn't do a very good job marketing then if half of them
no
are at 0 to 5%.
But the thing to note here is the most conservative number of people. So it's 24% are expecting double digit, but that compares to 28% in 22, 26% in 23, and then 24% in 24, which is when they surveyed them. So it's the lowest number expecting double-digit growth in the 3 years that they've taken this thing.
Interesting.
Second thing is predictions for the busy season. Almost half, more than half, expect busy season to go about the same. Only 13% expected to be worse than last year, and 35% expected to be better, which I thought that was good. It's a good number. What I really want to know is what is it they are doing so that they can have a better busy season, and sharing that, which they don't necessarily do here. I'm sure it's a matter of we got rid of a bunch of clients, or we got some new software, or we're automating something, or our workflow's better, or whatever the reason. But that's what. So at least half, more than half of folks expected to be about the same, which is pretty sad, right?
I was going to say I'd focus more on the 65% that it's going to be worse or the
or
same.
or the same, right? Like
Like
that's kind of sad
like
because
what did you do these last 3 months since the 10/15 deadline?
well, it's the hamster wheel, right? I mean,
Yeah.
these 65% of folks are on that hamster wheel. Just another turn. We'll figure it out. We'll see what happens. It can't be worse than last year. We're not going to invest a lot of time in reflecting on what we did well, or what we could improve upon, or what we can change. Or they got lazy or complacent, and now they're here in January and it's too late. So I can't do anything between now and 2 weeks from now. So,
Or
um,
accountants were being pulled and accountants are way too used to hitting the same as last year button, period. So Sally and
Sally, that's right.
they just check that box because that's a comfortable box for them.
Well, that, and they want to take their time off instead of spend it on the firm,
Mm.
right? They look at the last, and I mean, we can't, I'm not going to be, I mean, I took a lot of time off over the last week, and I hope they did too. But there are certain times when you don't necessarily have to take time off just because there isn't billable work.
Mm.
And so, like a week like this week, like, I worked Monday, I worked half a day Tuesday, I worked today. I haven't had a single client all week. I haven't had one billable hour in the last, call it, 24 hours that I've worked. And I have stuff to do. Like, I got a list. I got a notebook sitting over here with like list of things that I need to do that help me have a better year, or intended to, at least.
Yep.
But anyway, okay, moving on.
Yep.
Moving on. Now here's where it gets a little interesting. So these next numbers are how they expect their services to change. So the question is, how do you expect the amount of time you spend doing each of the following activities to change in the coming year? So for for compliance, accounting firms expect to do more, 24% of them expect to do more compliance work. 68% expect to do the same amount of compliance work, and the rest, no change or
Mm.
decrease. Now here's where it gets interesting. For advisory, half of them expect to do more, and half of them expect to do the same, which I thought that was strange. Like that, it felt like with the giant push on advisory that we would be seeing a lot more emphasis on increasing advisory, at least more than 50-50. That stood out to me. And administrative, this is another sad one. 70% of firms expect to do the same amount of administrative work that they did last year. And of all the places for improvement,
Yep.
right? The easy, low-hanging delegation,
You bet.
quadrant 3 of the Eisenhower box, like that's where more opportunity than anywhere else is. That's the easy stuff. And for only 13% to say that, no, I'm sorry, 19% to say that they expect administrative time to decrease is to me a missed opportunity.
Particularly in a world of AI and outsourcing
Right.
assistants, and like that's more available now than it ever has been to outsource these things.
I talked to a guy today in New York who's starting up an AI agent firm for accounting firms.
Mm.
And we spent about an hour talking about what he's doing, and he's trying to find ways to improve. We should have him on this podcast at
That'd be
some point
interesting.
to talk about what he does. But anyway, it's I mean, there's folks out there right now that are just doing everything they can to minimize the amount of time that accountants spend doing things they shouldn't have to do.
Yep.
And yet only 20% expect that time to decrease. But here comes the big one. Here comes a very interesting one. So you remember a few minutes ago I said that advisory services half think it's going to increase and half think it's going to remain the same. The next question: thinking about the time you spend serving clients, how much is spent in each of the following areas? In 2024, Accountants expect to spend half of their time, 50%, doing compliance work. That is up 5% from the previous year. Same question. How much time do you plan to spend in the following areas? Accountants expect to spend 30% of their time in advisory, which is down 4% from last year. It was at 35. So this poll, this response is basically saying that these firms are not expecting to spend more time providing advisory services. In fact, less. I thought that, I mean, given the conversations and the talks around CAS and all the things, advisory services stuff that we've talked about here, that one kind of shocked me a little bit.
But does it say time or does it say effort?
The time.
Time.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they've figured out how to make advisory services take less time.
Possibly. That'd be great if that was the answer. Yeah, that's very, all right. It's a very optimistic view you have, and I hope that's the case. The fact that if this question was revenue,
right?
How much of your revenue do you expect to take from these services? It'd be interesting to see how that correlated with time. Because if we could see revenue going up and advisory services going down, then we know we're on the right path, right?
Right.
But I don't have that information from the survey to point to say that's what's going on. But anyway, it was just such a contradiction to our hope for this industry to be moving towards a place of doing less compliance and more advisory, becoming more of that relationship with their clients. Getting this survey just really kind of caught me, like, what is that?
I think it'll probably take a giant leap in 2025 as people realize that AI is a risk for that compliance component.
Well, it's interesting. So the guy I talked to today, he's been talking to firms about how he can integrate AI into their services.
Mm-hmm.
And not all, but one of the conversations he talked about with the managing partner of a firm, I assume, was that they were trying to figure out a way to get AI into audit and tax. And now I get it. I understand that there's an opportunity to get in there, and by doing so, it reduces the hours you spend on those engagements. But those are fixed fee engagements,
right?
Like audits, you can't value price an audit because good luck. You can't audit price a tax return. I mean, I know there's people out there doing it, but it's harder.
Sure.
Like you can value-based priced advisory services, and you can get those into routine, automatic. It happens every month. This is what we hit the button. I mean, that's the opportunity to really create the value. And the clients see it as valuable because you're helping them make decisions about their business, reflect on what they're doing right and wrong, project next month, make decisions that'll change their financial performance, how to save money, how to make more. All the meat there is in that advisory. That's where value happens. But it was interesting to me that, this AI guy talking to a partner was like, we want you to focus on audit and tax. I was like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I'm not
focus
right.
100% on expenses, on efficiency, they're not focused on value of that right now. They're focused on the expense side of that.
I mean, go back to, the title of the survey was a balancing act between confidence and resistance. Like that word resistance is showing up here in these results. Resistance to putting more time, hopefully more effort or whatever, into advisory. Putting more time into automating things that your clients will actually value. There's still resistance, and there's an even bigger one here in a minute on the point of resistance. No surprise, but half of the folks are planning on hiring folks in this coming year, which I thought was low, but whatever. I think the average firm per this survey was going to be 11 hires in this coming year, which is just relevant to size. Here's the other one. What percent of your employees are working in each scenario? So in 2023, 52% were in the office. 2024, it's 56. Hybrid, it was 24 last year and 24 this year, so it stayed flat on hybrid. Fully remote is where that increase came from. It went from 25% to 20% of the workforce being fully remote. But here's the where's the big one here? Only 38% of accountants expect their firm to hire purely remote employees going forward. That's down from 50% last year. So firms are getting right back to the, if you don't work here, you don't work here.
Yep.
We're going back to that old model of getting into the office.
Yeah.
And I don't know what, I mean, just imagine if that trend continues and next year that 20% of remote goes down to 15%. Like it's just funny, the resistance. And that's the big point on resistance is we're resisting the remote workforce. Now, I'm just speaking for the survey folks. I know a lot of firms that have said screw walls and screw offices and we're going to work from anywhere you want to in the world and keep this business going just fine and probably better than otherwise because you're not commuting, you're not screwing around in the office, you're not spending so much time doing some of the things you don't need to do. Mm-hmm. Like it's more efficient and effective with not having to worry about being in an office. So, but it's just crazy to me that the survey is just showing us, there was so much excitement, right? Like we're going to get into advisory and we're going to have fully remote and we can work anywhere. And then you get this and you're like, oh, or maybe not.
Back to status quo.
Yeah. Maybe not. Maybe we're, what, we're through COVID. We're past it. We're done with it. We can just get back to business as normal.
Yep. So they're bullish on commercial real estate is what they're saying.
Exactly. Which I can, whatever. The next one, they're talking about the technology spend and 60% of firms are expecting to increase their technology spend this year, which I thought was good. 40% aren't going to do any more than last year, and 2% are actually going to spend less. So, seeing 60% of an increase in technology spend, I thought was that makes sense that they should be in whatever ways they can. Which technologies are on accountants' radar? So. Which one of these has your firm implemented or will implement in 2025? Let's see. So plans to implement. The first or the highest one is a digital workflow, automation, a CRM, PM, practice management, client portals, paperless office, digital DM, security solutions, which I thought it was interesting. There was only 12%, but again, 80% of them already have it. So 12% are just behind the times.
Sure.
And the biggest one, number one, is artificial intelligence and machine learning. So 32% of those surveyed plan to implement some form of AI machine learning in this coming year, which is exciting.
Yeah. And it's also in the news. And so they see that. And of course,
right. Exactly. They're like, I got to say that. That's what I have to say.
The news is not talking about, Canopy or TaxDome. They're talking about ChatGPT. So,
right.
That's top of mind.
And finally, what are the most anticipated challenges for differing firm sizes? So, for the smallest firms, the number one concern is keeping up with technology, which I understand just from a budgetary perspective. And number two, for the smallest firms, is keeping up with regulatory change. Number three is data and IT security. So small firms aren't as worried about people. They're more worried about tech and the IRS. For medium-sized firms, these are firms between 1 and 5 million. The number one concern is keeping good employees, retention. Number two is keeping up with regulatory change. And number three is keeping up with technology. And for larger firms, those greater than 5 million, the number one concern, again, is retaining good employees. Number two is getting new clients. And number three is data and IT security. So the only, for the medium and the big firms, people are number one. For the smallest firms, it's tech. And I think that's the takeaway here. So conclusions. Go ahead.
No, I think it's interesting that clients are on the radar, at least the top 3 of the radar for small and medium firms.
Well, that's what's interesting.
And regulatory changes are, sorry to interrupt you. No. That happens every year, every presidency, every 4 years. You're in this business to keep up on regulatory changes.
Right. It's part of it. It's inherent.
Shouldn't be your top concern.
But what is interesting, though, is what's missing here is that for the smallest firms and the mid-sized firms, acquiring and retaining new clients wasn't number 1, wasn't number 2, and wasn't number 3. Mm-hmm. So they're pretty confident that they've either got the clients they need or they're going to get the ones they need.
Right.
It's not a concern, which I think based on some of our conversations and our experiences, that's understandable. And for a bigger firm that's trying to grow, a bigger nut or a bigger number, it's understandable that that's a concern, especially if they're no longer the firm that the phone rings the way it does when you were a small shop and you had your neighbors and your buddies and family members and friends of family members calling you. So the takeaways, they're expecting basically a normal tax busy season this year. They want to spend more on advisory, but they just want to spend less time on it. Retaining staff remains difficult. At the same time, firms are refusing to allow fully remote. Well, what a coincidence.
Yep.
Keeping up with the pace of change is a concern. I didn't read this one out loud, but less than a quarter of firms are actually using a specific AI tool. But almost half aren't even exploring it. Not even looking into it right now.
I mean, to be fair, there are use cases for AI, but not specific to preparing a tax return yet that I've seen.
Sure. It's going to be, yeah. And I hear you. And you're right. I mean, the problem right now is that everyone's dipping their hands in this, their toes in this. And, just to come out with like a single, here's a great package. Here's a great thing here's how this works. Here's how it works. Here's how I'll show you, actually have it in front of you to understand it. I think, but this is the year I think that's going to happen.
I think so too.
I can't imagine we get through this year without there being some amazing bookkeeping, tax return prep, something, and there's already out there, but something that's a little bit more available to the early majority of innovation on the curve.
Yep.
And technology still takes up about 1/5 of accounting firm budgets, but is expected to increase. So,
well, that's all tax software.
For the most part. Totally. Yeah, it's nothing groundbreaking. So, what stands out to me is it's just, I guess the less time in advisory is something I'm extremely curious about. The resistance to allowing remote employees in a firm, I'm annoyed with. Mm-hmm. I get it, but I'm still annoyed with it. Wanting to spend more in tech, I think is a good sign. Some confidence in being able to grow is a good sign. The thing that really annoys you and I is the fact there's so many firms are just expecting this year to be another year like it was last year. Yep. Which is where we get a little, our blood boils a little bit, because it doesn't have to be that way. But otherwise, there's nothing crazy here. And there's not a lot of specific regulation that was quoted in this survey as being problematic, which in some years there is.
Right.
And so it's kind of nice to know that while there are plenty of changes, there's not some gigantic thing that a lot of these folks are staring down the barrel of.
Yep. Interesting.
So that's what I got. So I think we'll find out here. We've already got 2 days in. So, it'll be interesting to see as we move forward with how these things play out. And
did it say when that study took place?
I mean, it did, but it's going to take me a minute.
No, you're good.
September to October.
I was going to say, I bet you it was before the election.
Yeah, right. Totally. It'd be interesting to see if they'd done the same survey, in December.
Yeah.
But then they wouldn't have been able to put this out by the time they did.
Fair.
So just noodles, things to noodle on, things to think about, and see how this reflects your own opinions to those listening and what it means to you. And, you might find some things to resonate here, or maybe be even more resistant against.
That's right. Send the link to that to me, and I'll put it in the notes here.
Yeah, I'll forward it your way.
Cool. All right. Thanks, man.
Cheers.
See ya.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Practicing Accountant podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and also are somewhat inspired by it, possibly, as to how you might spend more or less time in advisory work, or how you might spend more or less on technology, or how you might be more available to professionals that are requiring remote work or not. But the surveys today definitely showed a little bit of what folks are thinking. And whether you agree or not, there's some good information in here to help you plan for this coming year so that it is better than it has been in the past. Thank you again for watching this episode of the Practicing Accountant podcast. We hope you share or like this and tune in next time for another episode. Cheers.